welcome back to another video. Thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about genres again and what makes a genre a genre. And today the genres we're going to be talking about are romance versus tragedy. First off, romance. What makes a romance a romance? Well, obviously a central love story. You need emotional tension, a sympathetic heroine, a strong, irresistible hero, a believable plot, intimacy, passion, commitment, and above all, a happy ending. It is not a romance if it does not have a happy ending. To dive into all of those a bit more, it needs a central love story. Obviously, if it's a romance, the plot has to center around a love story between two characters. Without that, it's not a romance. It's something else. It's a thriller, it's a sci-fi, it's a fantasy, it's a drama, it's a tragedy. If the romance is not the center of the plot, it is not a romance. Emotional tension. We all know that if there's no chemistry between the two characters, there's no reason to keep watching. There's no tension, there's no stakes, there's no emotional investment going on. They're not emotional with each other, so why should we be emotional about them? There needs to be emotional tension between the two characters in order for us, the audience, to become emotionally invested within them. A sympathetic heroine. A sympathetic heroine is someone whom we can relate to. Maybe even if they're not a good person, they're someone whom we can relate to, we can sympathize with. Katie Heron, who is the homeschool girl who's falling in love for the first time and a little bit shy and nervous and uncertain of how to even talk to boys. And we as the viewers or as the readers can sympathize with that feeling of being outside of the group, being shy and being nervous and stumbling over our words or, making mistakes around someone whom we have a crush on. And a strong, irresistible hero. You need to have the strong, irresistible hero because you just do. Mr. Darcy, Edward Cullen, Jess Mariano, all of these guys fall into the grumpy category, but also undeniably a strong category. And you need a believable plot. Romance novels, above all, romance movies, romance books, above all, they're formulaic. The romance genre is a bit like a chocolate cake. And a chocolate cake has a recipe. And you follow that recipe and you will not go wrong. Now, if you were to take a chocolate cake recipe and add caviar into the mix because you wanted to change things up a little, that's not gonna go over well because people didn't want caviar chocolate cake, they wanted chocolate cake. The way that you achieve this is by delivering a believable plot. Boy meets girl, boy and girl fall in love, villain tries to keep boy and girl apart, love wins all, boy and girl get married and live happily ever after. Romance also needs intimacy, passion, and commitment. You can have a romance that has commitment issues as a problem, but the commitment issues cannot be with the main couple that ends up together in the end. They can deal with maybe their own fears of intimacy and their own fears of commitment throughout the course of the story. But in order for it to be a romance, it has to have that happily ever after, and they have to overcome those commitment fears, those commitment issues, and they have to commit to one another as a couple. A romance must have a happy ending. The couple has to end up together in the end in order for it to be a romance. If they don't end up together, it's not a romance. They want to see those characters have the emotional tension, have their struggles, then eventually fall in love and get married and live happily ever after. You would not sign up for it if you thought you were going to have a happily ever after and then get sucker punched in the end, and then they broke up and it didn't work out. Who's gonna watch that? That's a horrible romance. That's not a romance at all. That is a tragedy. Without the happily ever after, you get a tragedy. What makes a tragedy a tragedy? A tragedy ultimately has a bad ending. It follows a character that's a good character who we root for, we want them to do well, and ultimately though, because of their own fatal flaw, they fail. And it ends in misery and sadness and suffering and death most often. So tragedies are the opposite of romance. Romance has to have a happily ever after. Tragedies have to have a bad ending. There's going to be suffering, terrible events, failure, challenges, happiness to misery, conflict, and most importantly of all, it ends in disaster. If you're wanting to really destroy your characters, then you're looking to write a tragedy. Character is king. What hook the readers and what pull them into the story and what get them going. And in a tragedy, the plot is what ultimately destroys the character. Here is an example of a modern day tragedy. Star Wars' prequel trilogy is a tragedy. And it's a tragedy because it ends in Anakin Skywalker's downfall, Padme's death, and the destruction and death of all the Jedi and the destruction of the Jedi Order. That is why it is a tragedy, but with hope in the end. So is it a good tragedy or is it a bad tragedy? Romance, everybody lives and they live happily ever after. Tragedy, everybody dies and nobody is happy. So if you are thinking of writing one or the other, that's how you know. Thank you for watching. I hope this video was helpful or informative at all. As you could see, I was contemplative myself in terms of what makes a tragedy and what makes a romance a romance. Let me know if there's any core or key things that make tragedy and make romance romance that I have forgotten about. Let me know what genre your current work in progress is in. I've currently been working on a romantic tragedy. I keep waffling about whether or not I'm gonna really end it like that. Can I really do that to my readers? But it'd be so good. It's such a good tragedy. I've got to. And I'll just say, it would be a tragedy in the vein of Revenge of the Sith, where it's a tragedy, but. So anyway, thank you guys for watching. Hope you have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.